I think he just wants to see you sweat a little bit, Alan.
Oh, is that we're live, Alan? Okay. Well, it says 7 o'clock on my time, so I'm guessing that we are live. Welcome back to COVID Chronicles, however many this is. I'm Dave Zanotti, joined by the Vice President of the American Policy Roundtable, Rob Walgate. We have an outline tonight that will take about an hour, and thank you for joining us. I want to be very clear about something to get started. We're not doing this because we got nothing better to do, and we don't presume that that's the situation with you either. We are in the midst of a national crisis, the likes of which we have not seen in any of our lifetimes. And I'm not talking about the virus. I'm talking about the virus of fear that has infected public policy and is now sweeping across the entire country and is wreaking havoc upon our nation, upon our laws, upon our liberties, and has a very serious and ominous forecast for the future unless we do something about it. So we want to talk about that tonight on some specific examples. For those of you that are brand new joining us, and those of you that are joining us as critics, as skeptics, or as opponents, welcome. We're fine. We live under a mandate that we don't enjoy, that says love your neighbor as you love yourself and pray for your enemies and those that despitefully use you. So if you're an opponent to everything that we stand for today, and you're expecting us to somehow go nuts and give you some extra special video to use somewhere, it's not going to happen because we're committed to an ethic of praying for those who oppose us. Now, I'm not saying I enjoy that. I'd much rather maybe take it outside on a regular basis, but that's not the ethic under which we operate. So this is a different kind of conversation. In addition to that, we are not shilling for any political party. We don't like them. We actually think they're the big problem in America today. One of the biggest problems that we've ever had, and we look to George Washington and John Adams to back us up on that. It was their idea first. So we're not involved in the political parties, nor are we involved in a defense mechanism for the current administration or a potential new administration. That's not what this is about either. This is about good public policy for the preservation of liberty. So the theme of tonight's conversation is safe or free. Our country is now divided into camps. People who want to be safe, people who want to be free. So we're going to talk about that all this evening. Good evening, Rob. Welcome back to COVID. What is this, 4? And then I add the radio broadcast, that would make it 16, in fact.
Quick math in your head. I like that.
Thanks for joining us. Where can folks find out more stuff about the COVID Chronicles?
Visit us at thepublicsquare.com. You can find all the broadcasts that we've done on our media network on radio stations across the country. You can also visit us at aproundtable.org to read our latest press releases, blogs, news articles that we think are worthy for everyone to take a look at. So thepublicsquare.com, aproundtable.org, and you can send questions in this evening, right? Yes.
You guys are monitoring the questions are being monitored?
Yep, I have a number already here, and I'll be checking support at thepublicsquare.com, so you can send those there. And for those that maybe this is your first time and you've missed previous episodes that we've done on YouTube, they're there. You can go back and review those and take a look at those as well at our channel.
Okay, so please be sending in your questions as we're going along. And we've been fortunate enough to be able to get to most of the questions that have come in. And then also, we hope that you will take the opportunity to send this all over the place. However you want to do your links and all of that sort of stuff, we appreciate it. It's been very helpful. Thousands of people have participated in viewing this, and it's been a very helpful conversation. Okay, let's start off with the first question. Why testing? Why testing? Why is it that everybody is saying testing? Well, everybody. A lot of people on television, a lot of people in positions are saying testing is so important. Let me be the first one to raise my hand in Tom Hanks-like fashion from the movie Big and to admit out loud that we've been studying this for the last 4 months pretty intensely, and I don't get testing. And since these conversations are largely unscripted, just like our radio program on the Public Square, Rob, I'll ask you, enlighten me. You are the younger and perhaps wiser one in all of this. What is the big to-do about testing? I don't get it.
I don't get it either, especially when it comes to what folks are saying regarding how daily testing could help, or even weekly testing. And we have to realize that's just a little snippet in time. That's one brief moment. The question becomes, are we going to test after someone returns from lunch? Are we going to test? And that's what some people seem to be pushing. I don't think we understand how many tests would be needed for that, number one. I also don't think people understand that there's not many folks that are going to be willing after the first one, maybe to have that nasal swab stuck in there to do the test, that they like to do it accurately. So I don't know how willing folks would be after they get the first one and test negative to say, you know what? I'll have another one of those, please. Sign me up. That sounds good. So,
so what if you go to a place where it requires to get entrance, you have to be tested every day like that?
Well, I think you're seeing some of those discussions take place when it comes to press briefings at the White House, when it comes to the discussions that have been taking place regarding professional sports and what's going to happen there. Number one, you're going to need an abundance of tests. And number two, you're going to need a lot of willing subjects. You are.
Nursing home medical care professionals, frontline people that are involved in healthcare. So let's make this a point of clarity. Let's go to the CDC. On their May 1st bulletin, the Centers for Disease Control said not everyone needs this test. All right, that's a quote directly from the CDC. Not everyone needs this test. Another quote, most people will have mild illness and can recover at home without medical care and may not need to be tested. That's not me speaking. That's the CDC. So when you hear about testing, wait a second. There's a conflict in the rhetoric. The CDC is saying is a matter of personal health? Probably not. Now, obviously, if you work in a nursing home and you go and you leave the facility every day to come back, I don't know how you can get in if you're not being tested every day. That seems more, and I just don't mean temperature testing. I mean, because how long is a test good for? All right, I'm tested today and I get the results. Let's say I'm fortunate enough to get a quick test. I understand that, that some of the results can come very quickly. So if I get a quick test, how long am I good to know that I'm negative?
Maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. We've had that talk when it comes to things such as youth sports, where if a team is in a tournament and wins the 9 o'clock game and they play at 1 o'clock and then they play at 5 o'clock, do you take temperatures of everyone coming in and out all day? You can't take a real test of those people. So what do you do? And what happens if they're asymptomatic? I made the mistake of saying that. I went somewhere that I had to have the temperature scan earlier today. I went to the dentist, not willingly, but I went, and they did the temperature scan. And I looked at the lady. She's like, "You're good." I said, "Well, what if I'm asymptomatic?" Now, I know I shouldn't have said that. Now, I know I shouldn't have said that, but that goes to show just because we're putting all these precautions in, some folks think that's going to make everything better, and it doesn't. It doesn't.
By now, the folks that are following the COVID Chronicles, and if this is your fourth broadcast, you know all this. So we're repeating it so that you can send this to someone else. According to the CDC, according to the science, the test is only good the moment you're tested. That's it. It's only good the moment you're tested. If you come in contact with the virus after you're tested, you may very well get it. It offers you no therapy, no relief, and really no peace of mind, but to know that in the moment, you are not infected. So why is the argument all over the country that we cannot open up anything? We have the lockdown. Remember, the lockdown happened to stop the hospitals from being overwhelmed.
To stop the surge, flatten the curve, the curve.
So the surge never happened.
Not only did
the hospitals are protected.
Not only did the surge never happen, but you have states that spent millions and millions and millions of dollars prepping for that surge, that, number one, canceled what they deemed elective procedures or elective surgeries, where there would be patients staying all night. And there's people that haven't been able to receive treatments for months and months in some places. And number two, they're now tearing down those same places that they built up. And most of them didn't see one patient. And it goes back to, Dave, the same with, and we've had a question or two about that, the same with all the talking points from the beginning in regards to ventilators and what the need was and what the push was compared to what reality ended up being.
What we've seen is a pattern among the, I don't know what to call them right now. I mean, you hesitate to call them the pro-virus community because no one's in favor of the virus.
No.
So I don't know exactly how to categorize the group of people that continue to tell us that we need to be tested. But let's just say the protesting, that doesn't even work either, does it? I have no terms for the folks that are calling for testing is the answer. But there is now a doctrine out there that says unless you test, we can't continue to move forward. We can't beat the virus without testing. Now, we've already substantiated that it has no therapeutic value. We've already substantiated that the CDC says you probably don't need it if you don't have a symptom. And most people will have mild illness, and you're just as good off to stay home. And get better. Not everyone needs the test. That's what the CDC says. But all the other people are saying you must test, you must test, you must test. So is it about testing, or is it about tracing and tracking? And that's the real question. The terminology is testing should put you into immediate isolation, into containment. Tracing has now been termed contact investigations because people are getting onto the scheme that the idea of testing is to be able to find out who's got it, who doesn't have it. But then once you find someone who is positive, to get into tracing all of those contacts and putting people into immediate isolation and containment if they've come in contact with another person. So there's a piece of federal legislation that has come out to enhance the tracing. And Rob has it right here.
Well, I have it right here. Not only do I have it right here, this may end up on eBay later tonight because this is Melanie Elsey's copy. This is marked up. This has her notes and everything on it. So we may just have to do a fundraiser later, throw it on eBay and raise a little money. I don't know if I accidentally stole this or intentionally stole this, but I know there's highlights here that I'm smarter after having Melanie's work.
So let's see the front of that bill.
The front of the bill, HR. There we go.
Okay, let's just take a second and let everybody see that again. In case this is news to you, this is an actual piece of federal legislation, a copy, marked up by none less than the official legislative director of the American Policy Roundtable, Melanie Elsey, and the bill number is 6666.
Yeah.
That's not a mistake. That's not a conspiracy tinfoil hat moment. That isn't a resurrection of Hal Lindsey and the late great Planet Earth from 1973. That is a current piece of federal legislation, the purpose of which is to spend $100 billion to do what?
Well, right underneath it says to authorize the Secretary of Health and Human Services to award grants to eligible entities to conduct diagnostic testing for COVID-19 and related activities such as contact tracing through mobile health units and, as necessary, at individuals' residence and for other purposes.
The knock on the door and a person with a paycheck from the federal government says, I'm here to advise you of the following: tracing, tracking, data collecting. Okay, there is a piece of federal legislation introduced, got a whole bunch of sponsors, right?
Oh, yeah. It's got a ton of sponsors on there. There's some names that many folks would know, such as Capter and Wasserman Schultz, and the originator of the legislation, Bobby Rush from Illinois.
From Chicago.
Yeah.
Okay, from the south side of Chicago. Okay, so now the mechanism of doing this is something that's also been in development from two very powerful sources, that being Google and Apple. And we have an article that you'll find in the show notes as well as at aproundtable.org. And that article is from PC Mag. And in that article, the folks at Google and Apple have been very transparent in revealing to everyone what their intentions are. And you will see pictures in that article of the actual screenshots of what the phone app will look like. They're encouraging you to place their COVID tracking mechanism on your phone. Now, they're making this available to county health departments and to states and to organizations. Whether there'll be a merge between HR 6666 and the app as far as cost and expenses, I don't know. But it seems like HR 6666 is designed to get money into organizations and to people to send them out with full paychecks to go knocking on people's doors. But where will the data come from? Well, that'll come from Google and Apple off of cell phones. They have combined, this is fascinating. Android and Apple iPhones are clearly some of the highest competitors in the world. They've unified to build a single platform app, and now they have released that app to the government agencies for free.
And so they agree on something.
Yes. Their hope is that the government agencies will then accept the app, adapt it to their own look and style, and then find a way to require people to have that app on their phone. So what does the app do? Okay, the app finds a magical way to record what any other phone that is within a few feet, like I think right now they say 5 feet, 5 or 6 feet, within 5 to 6 feet, or it might be more. If my phone is close enough to your phone, my phone will read your phone will read my phone. They will have a connection and a retained memory of the intersection of their crossing. And the way the app is currently described is if the phones are in the same proximity for 5 minutes or longer, this data will be created. Now, why 5 minutes? Maybe that's the beginning entrance. It doesn't take 5 minutes to get infected. So I don't know that 5 minutes will stay. I don't know that you could reduce the app down to 1 minute. In any case, the idea is your phone and my phone will merge data, and there will be a retention there. And then what happens is if either of us happens to become positive for COVID-19, then our phone will contact everyone over the last 2 weeks that was connected by that app and notify them that you should immediately go into quarantine because you have been in contact with someone who is now positive for COVID-19. Now, imagine that happening. That's okay. That sounds like voluntary. It's like, here's the heads up. Wow, how kind. Except for, what do you think the odds are, since it's the county health department or the state that's basically been given the app, that they're going to let that information not get to the people that have $100 billion from the federal government to do what? To trace you and to track you. HR 6666 is called the trace bill. Yeah. So now there they are. They're at your door.
Two things, Dave. First, I'm getting text messages from Alan Duncan. It's telling me that some folks can hear us but not see us. Their browsers are messing up, so they may need to hit refresh on their browser. That's what he's letting me know, and they'll be able to see us once again. And secondly, when you talk about testing positive or for COVID and the phone knowing it, who inputs that information? Am I inputting it myself? Is my doctor inputting it? What if I had lunch with you and I don't like you? No, that's just pretend. But what if I have lunch with you and I don't like you?
On any given day.
Yeah. On any given day, and our phones are next to each other, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe Dave doesn't need to leave his house for 2 weeks. I'm going to click, I'm positive. So then they come knocking on your door because now you had lunch next to someone that says they're positive, but I'm not positive, but I don't like you. So I want you to stay home. Is that crazy? Is that reality? Are they good? I mean, you're not going to have a doctor slip.
Let's take another situation. What if you test positive, but it's a false positive?
Yeah.
For that matter, what if you test negative and it's a false negative? But wait, there's more. Here's one for you. the reason I set this particular setting up, we've moved to different offices as these different COVID events have happened. You know, we have offices in Northeast Ohio, in Nashville, Tennessee, and in Orlando, Florida. So I'm communicating with you right now from the Orlando office. And here's something that happened to me the other day, and it's very annoying and it's very aggravating. I could not find my cell phone. Now, I basically blame, it's still here. I have a reason for this. I blame this particular piece of paper towel is guilty, is the offender. It wasn't me. It was this piece of paper towel that somehow magically blew over top of my phone on my desk where I had all this stuff all stretched out, actually the table that I work on, because I work on tables, not desks. So there it is, okay? My phone was missing. Now, it just so happens that this phone was missing in a room that was right by a doorway in which there were at least 6 workers who all had phones, who walked past and spent more than 5 minutes within 6 feet of this telephone. Now, it would have been even worse if I had left my phone on the porch outside where those people were all doing work and projects and going by for more than 5 minutes time. Here's the point. I wasn't anywhere near my phone for 20 minutes, but my phone was near 6 people. If any of those 6 people had tested positive, I'm going to be in 2 weeks of lockdown. And how do I prove that it wasn't me? I wasn't by the phone at the moment that it happened.
Oh, man.
Have you ever lost your phone?
Yeah. And so the scenario you just gave me about 87 more in my mind that could play out. And the thought that we're going to give, are these the people that we trust the most? Are the tech companies the people that we trust the most? I mean, the people that we're trusting to air this, and some people are saying they're having difficulty seeing it right now. It's being taken down. I mean, those are the people now we're going to trust with our health data and to make the best decisions for each and every one of our lives. Is that how it works?
Yeah. And now I'm not suggesting that Google and Apple don't have the noblest of intentions in this process. I'm not impugning their integrity in any way, shape, or form, or their technology. I'm just saying it's really difficult to quarantine the world. It's really difficult to control every set of options. People are going to be at risk of false positives, false negatives, lost phones, all sorts of other issues that are very, very risky and could get people into a whole lot of trouble. Okay, we have other people that are you picking up what I'm picking up?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of texts saying folks aren't getting us. I've got a number of texts of my phone buzzing that saying videos are being removed and all that fun stuff. So,
well, we're going to continue on for the balance of this hour, knowing that we may have finally gotten to the place where people that are controlling these platforms don't want to hear the truth any longer. But we're recording this. And you can find more information at thepublicsquare.com. That's where you'll find our radio broadcasts. And those radio broadcasts are not dependent upon YouTube, and they're not dependent upon other platforms. That's a program and a broadcast that we've been doing for 31 years of our 40 years. And you can gain access to that program at thepublicsquare.com. And so contact us if you suddenly you need additional help. Okay. Let's go to the next point. So here we are with HR 6666.
Well, and I'll tell you, DZ, I just got a text from my mom, so we're still good there. So they haven't taken us down. So my mom still sees us, so we're good.
Well, if your mom sees you, then we got hope. And so okay. So we've got the PC Mag. That's also listed up where you can take a look. Now, how are we going to solve these problems? Well, look, there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but there's a way that we have been particularly working on that we want to talk about today, and that's model legislation. The best way to address this is for state legislatures to take back the lawmaking responsibility and the lawmaking authority that they have. And that is by reforming quarantine laws. This is essential. So we had to pick a state to start, and so we picked Ohio because that's the state where the organization began. We have the longest 40-year history there. We are posting now the fundamental principles of model legislation. A bill was introduced in Ohio today in the Ohio House of Representatives that will have a bill number hopefully by tomorrow. But the model legislation draft is up available on your show notes on YouTube and at aproundtable.org. That's aproundtable.org. You can take that legislation, contact your state lawmakers, and ask them to help you adapt these principles to your state and to move forward.
You know, I've worked at the American Policy Roundtable for over 17 years, and we've been involved in a lot of things. I think, not to fire you up now, but I think one of the most energetic discussions you and I had over those 17 years has been about all this. When you've watched governors, when you've watched health directors, when you've watched attorney generals believe that they are the lawmakers in this process.
This is the problem. We got people making laws that are governing the minutia of people's lives, determining their futures, their incomes, their businesses, their health, and there's no law. Let's make something very clear. I saw a beautiful piece of paper in the state of Tennessee with the governor's signature on it and a lovely gold stamp. It's not a law. It is an order by the executive branch. If I go to court and say, but the governor told me, the governor said this, the judge is going to say, excuse me, what does the law say? The law is in the books passed by the legislature. It's not the governor's opinion. The governor creates, and this is happening all over the country. These governors are making this stuff as they go along. This is a grave. I'm out of words, folks. And I can't go into words that you're not allowed to say in public because I'm out of those too. There is no way to describe how bad, wrong, ugly, wicked, dangerous this is to the future of the republic, to your freedom, to your children's freedom. When people start dictating laws and not legislating laws through open public process according to constitutional principles, this is not America. We fought a revolution over this in 1776 to not be dictated to by the experts, but to be able to govern ourselves and accept the responsibility. I get off on this just a little bit. Let's go to history. The question is quarantine laws. This is the department. Here's how you can get smart. You won't find a college course on this. Here's where you can find it. Quarantine laws in your state. They all have them. All right. Most of them go back to the 1800s. When we did the research for the Ohio law, here's what we found. Model legislation. You go back to quarantine laws in the history, 1889. That's how old the language is that's on the books right now in Ohio, 1889. Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad law. There's a lot. The Ohio Constitution started in 1803, and there's a lot of great stuff in the Ohio Constitution from 1803. So being old doesn't make it bad. But let me tell you what happened back in 1889. There was a smallpox outbreak in the state of Ohio, and one of the local county departments of health, one of the local communities, the mayors, the leadership in New Washington, Ohio, decided to shut their town down, even though there wasn't a single case of smallpox within 2 miles of the town in 1889. This is history now. And this is documented history. We didn't make this up. So they did a general quarantine, first general quarantine, 1889. The State Department of Health came in and overturned the quarantine, calling it the most senseless and useless quarantine they had ever seen. On principle alone, the idea of a general population quarantine was rejected from the beginning. Another interesting principle of history coming up out of quarantine laws is this. The Department of Health in 1889 adopted this language, not only in Ohio, but you'll find this language across a large number of states, talking about interruption to commerce as it relates to quarantine shall be the least possible. That's that principle, that interruption to commerce shall be the least possible, has been a principle of quarantine legislation and quarantine application of the application of quarantine laws since the 1800s. Who in their right mind would slap out a general population quarantine without any regard to history or law? Now, let's be clear. If this was Ebola, this would be an entirely different conversation. It wouldn't be that the law still wouldn't matter and that we wouldn't need legislation, but it would be a very different conversation.
Now,
this is not Ebola.
No, it's not Ebola. And to be clear, some would say, well, you guys, being the American Policy Roundtable and the Public Square and our team, are calling for the quarantine laws to be changed. You're calling for them to be changed because you just don't agree with how they've been used? Or is it because one person doesn't need the power, or what? Would you be fine with these laws staying on the book if they were making decisions that you agreed with every single day?
Absolutely not. If it was simply a dictate by a governor, it's just as dangerous. Doesn't matter where we. In fact, I don't care what the law was. We wouldn't agree with it if it was constructed incorrectly.
But I think that's where there's common ground, because I look at all the people that are defending the laws. They're not defending the law. They're defending the decisions that have been made. So if these folks on the other side that want these laws to stay, if someone was making decisions they disagreed with, then they would want the laws to change. So we want the laws to change no matter if we agree with the person or disagree based on the structure of law.
Well, and the reason behind that is the chaos that gets created. And we've been watching that all across the country. The arbitrary decisions, the news conferences where an edict is made and then it's signaled, or the next day it's changed. And it goes back to, there are so many examples of where governors have issued edicts and then realized, oops, it wasn't very fair to do it that way because people really weren't able to do that. So we'll change it tomorrow. The unpredictability of these things are just absurd. You've got a memory there.
In the defense of law, I can think of one state where there was a state's attorney general that bashed a neighboring state because they were going after churches and places of worship and targeting them and not respecting the First Amendment. And I agree. The First Amendment was not being respected. And that governor in that neighboring state was wrong. The problem was the attorney general that wrote the op-ed has been wrong on every other amendment to the United States Constitution almost when it comes to applying these quarantine laws they want to pass because they're like, oh, we didn't target churches. Well, you didn't target churches, but you seized people's property. They didn't have due process. So there's a litany of things we could go through. Don't strain your shoulder patting yourself on the back for the one thing that you may have gotten right.
Well, there are key principles in quarantine reform laws, like it's got to be the legislature that's doing this. It must be under the control of the legislature. Now, there's a role for the Department of Health. There's a role for the governor, but the legislature must be the lawmaking body. It cannot be done. You can't close a state, close an economy, abrogate civil rights. You can't do these things without due process. First off, you can't do them without a darn good reason in law. And then secondly, you certainly can't enforce them without an incumbent practice of due process of law. State laws can fix that problem, and they can do it in a hurry. The model legislation is up. You can pick, and it can be passed in a matter of days. This is not complicated stuff. We've all got enough pain now in the experience to be able to moderate this. The other thing you have to do is you have to put a time clock into these things. They can't just be forever. They can't be until we have a vaccine. Newsflash, we still don't have a vaccine for AIDS. And when we do have a vaccine for COVID-19, what happens if it's only 40% effective, like most vaccines for this type of virus? Does that mean we're going to have a 60% lockdown? And you say, well, we're almost out of this thing. We don't need a law. Who are you kidding? We'll be out of this thing when the people who have seized the power decide to give it up. And are you sensing any of them is interested in doing that anytime soon? No, in fact, what we've actually come to is the Hunger Games portion of this now. I would encourage everyone to go back and watch Hunger Games Part 1, not little kids, but Hunger Games Part 1. And what you'll find is right from the beginning, the premise of the film is that the people, the elites in power, required that every year a penance be paid to the Capitol to remind you of the cost of rebellion. And I want to tell you something, friends, right now. There is a vindictiveness that's going on in this country from people in power, and they are fed up at not being listened to. And Every time you find someone resisting this, no matter how intellectual, historical, constitutional, or noble their argument is, they are being smashed by the media. And they are being criticized by the politicians. And there is a vindictiveness that's going on. You take a look at some of the stuff that's going on, literally going on, actual footage of law enforcement over masks. I mean, and some of the things that are happening, the arrests, this is crazy.
But that goes back to, Dave, we talked about the CDC earlier, and that now we can go back and take a look. We talked about how recommendations they've gave haven't been heeded. But let's just mention masks briefly. I mean, there's all kinds of video now floating around of Dr. Fauci saying it would almost defeat the purpose in the beginning to wear a mask. He said he sees no benefit in a pandemic. And now everything's changed. The messaging has changed. And it amazes me throughout this process how the messaging constantly changes to fit whatever narrative they want to maintain that control.
This is not conspiratorial thinking. The mask question is a clear question of division. It's not a question of respect. This is not about respecting your neighbor. It's about teeing up your neighbor.
Well, and I've also seen people that I never dreamed would be bullies turn into bullies when someone does something they don't agree with. I saw someone respond to someone that didn't have a mask on, and they didn't know if that person had asthma or breathing difficulties or is unable to wear a mask, but that doesn't matter anymore. And you know why it doesn't matter? Because elected officials get on television and basically tell you have free reign to bully anyone you want to that doesn't have a mask on because they're not showing respect to you in their eyes or anyone else.
So safe or free is the theme, and that's the question. The model legislation is available. It must be passed in state after state after state. What does it take to make this happen? It's critical mass. 1, 2, 3 states pass these sorts of things, and it's off to the races. And they make common sense, and they're not controversial bills. They're simple bills that require process. And what's the benefit? The benefit is that this doesn't have to keep on happening, and it doesn't have to repeat itself, because I personally, I have to tell you, this is a test. This is a test of the emergency system. This is a test. What they do to us today is something they're going to do again once they realize that they can push people at this level. Let's move to the next question, which is litigation. Now, it'd be great if litigation alone would fix this, but if we win every court battle, we still have to have laws that construct how we're going to deal with these things going forward. There is a significant piece of good news out of Wisconsin. The Supreme Court has struck down the orders of the Wisconsin governor and done so based upon the fact that the governor did not incorporate a legislative process. He's not a lawmaker. He left the legislature out. He does not have the legal authority to make the law up by himself. And so the Wisconsin orders are struck down. That's great news. It would be wonderful if every Supreme Court, every state Supreme Court had the courage to stand upon constitutional principles alone and strike down every one of these illegal orders that are not laws, that have shut down economies and that are ruining lives. This would be a wonderful situation. Then maybe we could prioritize, which is what we should have done, how to operate legally and to set the priorities to help the people who need the most help in the midst of this. Because while governors have been busy doing their stuff, focusing on beating up their opponents, focusing on taking control, and doing all the things that they've done, the people who need the help the most in the nursing homes, the aged, the elderly, the most vulnerable, have not been number one priority. And Rob, statistically speaking right now, as you look across the states, state by state by state, what are the percentage numbers of the deaths coming from this community?
There's over 1/3 when you put them all together. But when you look at the hardest hit states, you're looking at over 50% of all the deaths in that state coming from nursing home or long-term care facilities.
Say that again.
In some states, they're over 50% of the deaths in some respective states have come from nursing home and long-term care facilities. Overall, when you take the country as a whole, it's roughly, I believe the New York Times reported at roughly 35%. Is that what the article? I'll pull it up just to make sure and we'll post it. But 35% was, so over a third. But some states are trending much higher than that, because what you had was you had governors and other places saying no. If a patient comes from the hospital or a patient comes from somewhere and they're positive for COVID-19, nursing homes did not have the ability to turn those folks away, and they were going back in the nursing home. We know that's a small environment, close quarters. We know that the virus does spread easily, and that's the reason. I mean, think about it. The reason it spread like crazy in New York City, you think of the subway system, you think of public transit, you think if those things would have been shut down, then they would have had a chance to not spread. Well, in a nursing home or an extended care facility, you're in close quarters. The same with prisons. It has spread in prisons. The difference being in prisons, many would say there's a healthier population in the sense of not as old. So we know the elderly are more susceptible to this virus, and it attacks them.
So prioritization was a missed opportunity. Maybe if we could get the lawmakers engaged and the governors back on the correct side of the Capitol where they belong, we could solve these problems much more effectively instead of creating all the alternative crises. Now, so what happened in Wisconsin is good. State Supreme Court's doing the same thing, all the better. How do you get engaged? That's very simple. If you want to contact the members of your state Supreme Court, you can write them letters. All you have to do is go online and find their addresses. They'll read your letter. Now, they may not necessarily respond, but that doesn't hurt any. And the other thing is that, remember, it was the lawmakers in Wisconsin that came forward and said, we've been left out of the process. These orders are illegal. So once again, your state lawmakers, the same ones that are working on your quarantine reform legislation, can also move forward and litigate on your behalf, on behalf of the people. And they have standing in court to do so. And they can go ahead and get these laws struck down. Now, it's going to take courage. It's going to take courage. In Tennessee, where you've got a Republican legislature and a Republican governor, it's going to take courage for the Republican legislature to stand up and say, we're not taking this anymore. We don't care if the governor is supposed to be our guy. Same thing in Ohio. We don't care. We're going to court.
Going to court to fight on that front. And also, as we've talked about with quarantine reform legislation, and I know we've discussed this at length, but it's important once again to remind, the priority is to get it done correctly, not to get it done quickly. And sometimes those are confused. We don't have to run. We want it done as fast as possible, but you don't want to sacrifice the quality of good legislation just to say you did something. That's right. Important.
Right. Now, we've got a good piece of legislation that's a model for the nation to look at. You can find it in these show notes or at aproundtable.org. We'll be talking about it. We'll be tracking it. You can stay in touch with us through aproundtable.org, through thepublicsquare.com.
Yep.
As this law progresses, and it should be introduced in all 50 states.
It was filed with the clerk's office in Ohio. It will be a part of the process, be introduced. They have session again next week. It will be moving along, and we will be keeping everyone up to date on that and making sure they have the copy.
We can also encourage our lawmakers to file immediate suit in the state Supreme Court based upon challenging governor's orders. And remember, the Attorney General himself of the United States, Attorney General Barr, has encouraged people to challenge these orders in federal court as well. So there is an option there, and we're seeing that. In Ohio, the 1851 organization has two suits right now, one on behalf of a bridal shop that was picked as a loser in the winner and losers game, just like Hunger Games, and I might add, and also now a series of gyms that are also saying, wait a minute, we can operate. If Walmart can operate, why can't we? We can keep people safe. Why are we the losers? So they're challenging Pen M as well.
And it shows that the government picking winners and losers. Professional sports teams, I'll think of Ohio. The Cleveland Cavaliers were permitted to open their facility, were permitted to have players there to work out and do certain things, but other gyms that had employees weren't permitted to allow their clients, if you will, to come in, even if they followed those same parameters. they weren't permitted. So there's special exemptions given. Winners are picked by the government. That's not the role of government.
Yeah, that's what happens in the Hunger Games. It's not what's supposed to happen under American constitutional law, where we're all supposed to stand equal before the law. Safe or free? That's the question. So we've looked at HR 6666. We've looked at what's happening with the phone app application of it, $100 billion coming down the pike. That particular legislation, of course, doesn't have to pass. Now, chances are very good it's going to pass in the United States House of Representatives because it's a Democrat-led bill with Democrat majorities, but it can be stopped in the Senate. It must be stopped. And it doesn't mean just because it looks like the Dems have got a pushover on this one that we shouldn't be contacting our members of Congress, no matter what party they're from, and saying no, 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 and then doing the same thing in the United States Senate. So those are pieces and portions of that. And then we talked about litigation. We talked about the good news out of Wisconsin. This should happen in more states. Okay, Rob, let's go to questions.
Questions. Constitutional term limits, are they possible? That's a question coming from someone. It's coming to the forefront. I know there's history there with constitutional term limits and the American Policy Roundtable.
Yeah, well, back in 1992, we helped lead that project in 14 states. And at that time, those 14 states included congressional seats as well, which was a case we lost very narrowly in the United States Supreme Court. And it's not that we might have a chance to win that case again in the Supreme Court if the court changes again. But sure, term limits have a big deal about that. The people that are sponsoring the legislation in Ohio are newbies, if you will. You have 8-year term limits there, and I shouldn't say newbies. I don't mean to be insulting to the legislators, but they're not 8-year or 16 or 32-year people. All right, these are folks that are relatively new to the process. They get it. They feel very much in touch with their constituents, and they're introducing legislation. They're not waiting on the leadership to give them permission. They're doing what they came here for. So constitutional term limits are very important. If your state doesn't have them, you could. Now, it depends on how you go about it. If you have a ballot initiative state, it's easier to get it done. If you don't, then what we've got is a situation where you have to move it through the legislative process. Possible, but very difficult. But that goes back to elections. If you elect people who believe in term limits, we can get term limits. That's the way that it works.
We have a question regarding questionnaire being given to an employee from an employer, and the employer actually happens to be the state. It's a government worker. They're saying they've been given a questionnaire, asked if they've had a fever recently, have they had any COVID-19 related symptoms, have they traveled out of state? They're given this questionnaire every week. Is that legal to be forced to answer a questionnaire based on travel, based on health? Does your employer have the right to know that information?
I certainly don't think so, and under any circumstances. In the state of Tennessee, you have the 5 same questions every single day that they ask you every single day, along with your temperature checks. I don't think it's legal. We've also got stories coming up right now out of Ohio with the ability to reopen schools. One of the things they're going to say is that if you work in a school, you can't travel out of the state. And if you come back, you got to be quarantined for 2 weeks if you leave the state. I mean, no, this is an invasion of privacy. It violates your Fourth Amendment, your Fifth Amendment rights, all kinds of rights. But you see, as long as they're working off of governor's orders and not off of constitutional laws legally passed, they get away with stuff like this.
Well, I'm just thinking where I went to school, there were teachers that taught at our schools that lived in other states because we were a border community. So I guess they need to be looking for a new home in some of those places. However, think about that. They've already turned states against states because remember, in the state of Ohio, there was an order given that they stopped the sale of hard-proof liquor in the state of Pennsylvania, and Ohio bordering counties were told you are not permitted to sell to people from Pennsylvania that came across the state to buy that. So they could, I guess next they're not going to sell them bread and milk and gasoline either. I don't know. I mean, we're turning neighbors against neighbors and states against states.
Next question.
Is this a distraction for November to just vote by mail? Are some people using this as a political ploy was the question.
Oh, there's no doubt that this is what's happening right now is turning electoral at every level, and that there are a number of people that are and organizations and I would even suggest political parties that are anxious to see both the Electoral College destroyed And if that requires electoral chaos in the process, they're all for it. There are people that would love to see a pure mail-in ballot just because it proves we can deconstruct the status quo. And if you can deconstruct the status quo and create more chaos, it gives you more windows of opportunity for mischief. Mischief breaks down trust in the system. And if you can break down enough trust in the system, create a crisis, then you can solve the crisis by moving in your agenda. You know, Rahm Emanuel wasn't kidding. There are a large number of people in the political process who believe that the way you move people is to scare them. And the way you move people is to create crisis that scares them, and then they'll listen to you. So you prepare the solution that you want, you create the magic spell formula to spin upon them to terrify them, and then you solve the problem all along. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think it's despicable. And that's exactly what's been going on time after time after time. Yeah. And I'm not making this up. Rahm Emanuel said it's a core doctrine of what they believe, and you never let a crisis go to waste, even if you manufacture it yourself.
All right. When the president, the governor, and the mayor all differ on their rules or opinions of rules on when a church should open, who should the pastor listen to?
I think Pastor John Bouquet on our board of trustees would say that pastors should always listen to their employer. And since their boss has risen from the dead, they should be listening to him. The book of Acts chapter 4 and 5 say we must obey God rather than man. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Lord's going to tell everybody to do exactly the same thing in the same way. We're not going to get into the argument that an open church for open worship versus a virtual church is any less a church or any more being godly or obedient than the other. No, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. But the question is asked quite right. People should, in leadership in the church, should listen to the leader of the church and do what he says to do and what his spirit leads and what his word instructs.
Opinion of current Ohio reform legislation. I'm guessing this question is in regards to Senate Bill 1, which was passed last week by the Ohio House. It was a bill that sat dormant. It was amended. And we've talked that it's important to do things the right way and make sure the law is done effectively. And we endorse and support the bill that has been filed with the clerk today.
If you've been holding on, here's why this is better than Fox News. All right, because we'll tell you what really happened. For months, we've been asking for help in multiple states of leaders, and they've been telling us graciously, but to go pound salt. They've been saying, nope, not doing it, not doing it, not doing it. And almost all of them have said, you're on your own. We're not going to touch this till it's all over. Then we'll clean up the mess. They just didn't want to touch it. The governor's got it. We're not getting in the way. We're not going to get in the way of the media. They were very honest with us. They said, you're on your own. See you later. We didn't quit. There were a lot of lawmakers who that wasn't a good enough answer for. So they wanted help. And together we've been crafting, with a lot of Melanie's help and a lot of other really good people around the country, we've crafted this sample legislation. Well, things started to change. Lawmakers began to get ticked off at the way governors were abusing the process. And in some cases, they decided, well, we're going to try something. In Ohio, Larry Householder, the Speaker of the House, decided SB1 would be the vehicle. It was already a bill that was in process. So the Ohio House amended it and put in one or two provisions in regards to quarantine reform. They moved it back to the legislature, to a committee in the legislature for review, and they put a time clock stop on it at 14 days. Those are two principles that are in our reform legislation, but they're nowhere near enough. It was a symbolic move to basically tell the governor, who's a Republican, that the Republican Speaker of the House was a little sick and tired of this. Okay? It was a slap at the governor's office. Well, the governor, Mike DeWine, went nuts and said he's going to veto that legislation or any other legislation. So he comes back. Now we got a fight between the two of them. No sense of compromise, no sense of Now, John Husted, the lieutenant governor, says on the Bob France program just a few days later, oh, our office, the governor's office, lieutenant governor's office, we're very interested in legislative reform on this. It's an open conversation. We know the laws need to be reformed. As soon as one idea comes up, one idea, the governor goes nuts and says, not a chance. See, this is about control. This is about people who believe that they have to take care of us. And if you don't do what they say, penance is coming. You will pay for your rebellion. That's their message. First, we're going to guilt you. Then we're going to shame you. Then we're going to get you. We're going to find a way. Now, this is crazy. This is not America. This has got to stop. So we're moving forward with a more sophisticated piece of legislation, a much more comprehensive bill, but it's still reasonable. It makes sense. It's built on the history. We can do this. It's not that complicated, but it works. So we're going to put in competitive legislation. And probably what will happen is the ideas will merge, the sponsors will merge, the leadership will merge, and a good bill will come up. And who knows, by the time most people get in this, they're not going to have the trouble that we've seen in Ohio. Tennessee could pass this bill in a heartbeat. Florida should pass this bill in a heartbeat. But Pennsylvania, they should pass a piece of legislation like this. Though obviously, the governor's not going to be too happy about it in Pennsylvania, but it doesn't matter. You pass it anyways. You pass it anyways because it's the right thing to do. So that's the story behind SB1. It's a contest between the speaker and the governor.
It is, and you heard in the Ohio Senate did not have session this week, and there was a bill that was introduced in the Ohio Senate as well by Senator Rogner that went forward as well. So that bill's probably going to come up for discussion as well. But we support the one with that was filed at the clerk's office today in the House.
And we'll have a number on that bill probably tomorrow or very soon. But right now you've got. Right now, you've got the actual language available on the sites, and you can work off of those ideas. A couple more questions, Rob, and we'll go.
Yeah, testing, all the tests that are needed. Who's gonna pay for that?
Yeah, darn good question. We're paying for everything else.
Bailouts. States that were bankrupt before COVID-19 crisis are still broke, and now they want the federal government to bail them out for mismanaging their funds. Should the rest of the country be on the hook for that?
Of course not. We shouldn't have started down this path. President Trump opened a door that should never have been opened. I believe he's walked away from that door now. But once it was opened, you saw what happened on people blowing through. And let me take you the direction that we're going on this question. The question is there hope that we're going to get out of this thing? It's going to make sense. Yeah, there is hope. We'll close with a word of hope in just a moment. Yeah, another question, Rob.
Yeah, right here. The vaccine. Just someone asked, do people look at there's a lot of talk about vaccines, what's coming up, Bill Gates being involved, and are people looking at ingredients in vaccine, especially when it comes to this one, which will be one of the most rushed in the history of vaccines, to be aware of what is in there? Because like you mentioned earlier, vaccines can be a guessing game.
Not only are vaccines dangerous if they're rushed, they're also dangerous if they're mandated because not everybody's body's the same. We have to be very, very careful. And just like now they're doing the tracing and the HR 6666, what's going to happen when those people are then turned around to be the trackers to make sure that everyone's been vaccinated? And is the vaccination now going to become your passport? You can't come to work unless you're vaccinated. You can't travel across straight lines unless you're vaccinated. You can't. Again, the Constitution is what we're losing. Our liberty is what we're losing. And this is why we've got to do these steps. And we've got to rise up and work through a constitutional process. I know it's not easy and it's not simple. And there isn't a magic wand to make this go away. There's not. It's going to take hard work.
Someone wrote in they live in a state where their property taxes go for schools and parks and other things, yet those places are off limits and closed. Does that mean their property taxes are still due?
Yeah, not only are the property taxes due, but now there are states that are cutting appropriations to schools and yet going to put more burdens on schools when they reopen to have all kinds of additional responsibilities. How does that work? And those cuts are being recommended by governors, the same governors that are creating the problem. Okay, we could go on all night. Let's stop with a word of hope because we honor these at an hour. We have a problem in America with our mental conditioning. We believe that because we're a voting population, that until you have 51% of anything, you can't get anything changed, that everything has a 51% threshold for change. It's got to be 51% or you can't get there. That's not the way change happens. Sam Adams knew this in the committees of correspondence in the beginning. He was the one that talked about these tiny organizations and groups of people that create brush fires across the land for the sake of liberty. There is a critical mass in every single debate, and that critical mass brings you to a point where enough people are working together, committed, that they begin to move the rest. And that critical mass is somewhere around 25, 28%, and people begin to move. And that's how change actually happens. To get to 51%, that's the last stop on the train. You've got to get critical mass, and we are very, very close with these ideas right now. Most people know this is wrong. They know it in their hearts because they know they were made to be free. Inside, they don't want to be a slave to the state. They don't want to be dictated to under house arrest. Now, I'll give you one other piece of hope in this. When you look at the great stories of deliverance from the Bible, the great accounts, you find that God often uses small groups, small numbers, and the most unlikely characters, the most unlikely circumstances, the people who have the least number of resources, who are simply willing to step out in faith and try to bring great deliverance. Our country is in need of a renewal of the American spirit. And this particular crisis can bring us back to that place where we are willing not just to embrace the Constitution and the Declaration, to embrace the principles upon which they stand, but to change our lives in such a way that we work toward those principles. Now, I know some of you don't believe that because you live in states like New York, where you're in a part of New York that's conservative, but you got the city. Or you live in Peoria, Illinois, where you are all a bunch of conservatives, but you got the city. You got Chicagoland sitting on top of you. I understand that. That fight is difficult and it's going to take a long time. But you can still in your communities do what you can do and look for the leverage points in other parts of the country where you can mobilize and help them. Because eventually you can surround even the most liberal places with ideas that work. Because the ideas that don't work. Eventually, Babel falls. But it doesn't fall because we build a bigger tower. It falls under its own weight because we're the ones found faithful at the bottom, pushing against it if need be, building better alternatives, doing the right thing. And that's the story of deliverance over and over and over again. There is hope. All we can do is the right thing. And that's what we're trying to do every day on the public square. We do it as a nonprofit. We do it as a nonpartisan. We do it for the sake of liberty. Not everybody agrees with our approach. People are still a little bit scared. We're not suggesting anybody do a single thing that's irresponsible. We're not denying the fact that the virus is real, particularly if you are in the most at-risk populations.
Yes.
Right now, there's an equal risk. Our liberty, our Constitution. That's what we've got to deal with. See you on thepublicsquare.com. Thank you all for listening. Rob, thanks for being with us again. Alan, thank you. Anna, thank you. Thanks to the team. And we will see you again. I hope we don't have to do number 5. Probably we will. We'll keep you posted. Thank you and good night.
Good night.